If you're a habitat manager like we are, you probably own multiple chainsaws. And chainsaws are a tool, and all tools need maintenance, especially motorized tools. So today, we're back at Stihl. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us again,
Thank you, Grant.
We talked about chainsaw sharpening and some stuff last time we were here, and that really helped us. I mean, we use saws almost daily, and we've been going to the shop, getting them sharpened, whatever, and man, when you showed us your system, using a 2-in-1, that was awesome.
Good, good.
But there's more to running a chainsaw, keeping it running than sharp blade, and today we're gonna talk about fuels, because fuels are the lifeblood of a saw, right?
Yep.
So I'm gonna sit back and learn just like you guys, and you're gonna take us through what fuels, why, where, how, so that way all of our saws will stay running better and we can create more acres of habitat.
Today I want to talk a little bit about fuel, because I get asked questions all the time. What kind of fuel do I need to use in my saw? What am I going to get the best performance with? Can I use av fuel in my chainsaw? So I want to take some of the mystery away from gasoline that you put in this small power equipment. Stihl recommends in their chainsaws to use an 89 octane fuel. Now, what is octane? I get that question a lot of times, so what does that mean to me? Octane is the fuel's resistance to auto ignition under heat and pressure. So when the piston's coming up in the bore, this saw has been operating for, let's say, 10, 15 minutes. The piston's starting to climb in the bore. We're going to take this in real slow motion. Piston starts to rise in the bore. We start to compress the fuel and air that's on top of the piston. Under the heat that these air-cooled engines produce, sometimes that fuel can get so hot and pressurized so much from the compression in the engine that it auto-ignites. And we definitely do not want that. If you auto-ignite, that's always going to lead to detonation in the cylinder, and you're going to get something in terms of like this right here. You'll get scoring on the exhaust side of the piston. That's typical of a two-stroke engine. That's not just Stihl, that's not just other brands, that's typical across the line of all two-cycle engines. So we want to definitely avoid that, because that can be some really expensive repairs. So minimum, we want to use an 89 octane fuel. Another question that I get asked a lot is, can I use fuel with ethanol fuel in it? The answer is yes. The dominant fuel in America is 10% ethanol. There's no way that we could produce a machine, or anyone could produce machines that could not use 10% ethanol. The only thing about ethanol is you have to make sure that you handle it correctly. You definitely want a fuel can that's tightly sealed. You don't want to, I've seen this many, many times. You go out in the field and you work with some guys that have been having issues with their saws, and you see a stick stuck in the nozzle of their can, or the vent cap's broken off. If you're going to use ethanol fuel, you want to make sure that that can is tightly sealed to keep any air, any of the outside air, from getting into the can. That air has moisture in it. This year has been phenomenal with the amount of rainfall that we've had, and that air is saturated with water vapor, and that gets into the can. It'll be drawn into the can, and ethanol loves moisture, so it will it will weight the ethanol down and pull that ethanol out of the suspension of gasoline and oil, and it'll end up settling on the bottom of the tank. We don't want that to happen. The fuel tank is also a very important part. Periodically, just take the cap off and drain that fuel out. So you're going to have to properly dispose of the fuel. Don't just go pour it on a stump or set it on fire on a brush pile. Make sure that you properly dispose. But if you look at this closely, at the bottom of this right here, you can see pure water. So water's gotten into the fuel system, and that's definitely going to cause some running issues. So we talked about E10 in the fuel earlier, and what happens when it collects moisture out of the air. The ethanol will separate from the gasoline, and if it gets enough water into the alcohol, it'll actually drop out of the suspension. The little test that I do here, that I show in all my trainings, and I show this to end users as well, just like yourselves. If you take just pure water and drop it in alcohol, you can't see that water droplet hit the bottom of that little beaker right there. because the alcohol will absorb it before it gets there. It's still there. The water is still there, but it's absorbed into the molecules of the alcohol, and it basically looks like it just disappears. When that alcohol gets enough water in it, mixed with it, it'll be heavy enough that it'll drop out of the suspension, go to the bottom of the tank, and in some cases, your machine may start with pure alcohol and water combined. Yes, you can use fuel that doesn't have ethanol. In some places in the country, you can find fuel that doesn't contain any ethanol, and that's fine to use that as well. I've also had questions, can I use airplane fuel? Can I use av fuel in it? You can, but that is overkill because that's usually a very high octane fuel and we just don't need it. So you're going to be spending more money than you need to for that type of fuel. So the other thing that we've come out with in the last few years is premix fuel. This is called Motomix. You have to be careful with that too, because not all premix fuels are created equal. This gasoline is specially formulated for two-cycle air-cooled engines, and if you can see on the can, it has a 93 octane. So it has plenty of protection from heat and auto ignition, heat and pressure and auto ignition. So this fuel works very, very well. This contains ultra oil, which is a synthetic oil, and it doesn't create any kind of carbon or anything built up on top of the piston. It's a very, very high quality oil. It works very well in our equipment. The last thing I want to talk about is storage, because I get this question as well. You get finished with your chainsaw, let's say it's January, February, you're finished with your saw for a while, you just go out and put it in the shed, leave it stored that way. You don't do anything to it to store it. You use just regular pump fuel in it, and the pump fuel is only good for about 30 to 45 days. Once it hits that 45-day mark, it's going to start to deteriorate. Pump fuel is made for automobiles. It's only going to be consumed very quickly. It's put in the automobile with a computer so that it has sensors all over, and it's made for pressurized fuel system. We have adapted and used that in our chainsaws for years, and it works okay. We just got to make sure that we don't store it for too long of a period of time. What we recommend is that if you're going to store your equipment for any length of time, use the stihl Motomix. This fuel is good for 2 years after the cap is removed and up to 5 years with storage before you open the cap. So it's a very, very high quality fuel. If you're going to store your piece of equipment for any length of time, then you need to drain all the pump fuel from that machine, start it up, let it idle dry, and then replace that with a little bit of stihl Motomix. You can start the saw up or start the equipment up, let it run just for a couple of minutes, let it cycle through the system, and then shut it off and store it, and that machine will be ready to go when you are. So the alternative to using Motomix is just to drain the fuel out, drain it back into your container, start the machine, let it run dry, and store it. A lot of the additives and things on the market we don't recommend because they contain high contents of alcohol in some cases, and it's best just to store them dry if you're not going to use the stihl Motomix. So I also get asked about a lot of the different mix ratios out there. There are 32 to 1, 40 to 1, 50 to 1, 100 to 1. There's all kinds of mixes out there available. We recommend 50 to 1. And the reason that we do is there's only a small amount of lubrication between the piston and the cylinder. We run a very tight tolerance for performance. And we have to have an oil film between the piston and cylinder to keep two pieces of metal from rubbing together. This may sound a little bit hokey, but if you take your hands and rub them together like this pretty fast, you create heat. That piston moving up and down in the bore, in some cases, is moving up and down 24,000 times, 12,000 upstrokes, 12,000 downstrokes, equaling 24,000 times that piston's rubbing against the cylinder. We have to create a good lubricant between the piston and cylinder to keep those two pieces of metal apart. Stihl recommends a 50-to-1 fuel to oil mix. And what we mean by that is that we use 50 parts of gasoline to 1 part of oil. Now, when you think about it, that isn't a lot of oil, but it's adequate as long as you use a high quality oil like the Stihl Ultra. That keeps all the metal components inside the engine from coming in contact with each other. We have oil already in the container where it just takes a bottle to the certain amount of gasoline that's listed on the bottle. Okay, so next, I want to talk about what happens whenever you don't store that product properly. You get that machine out. This may sound a little funny to you all, but I bet you can relate. You get that machine out of storage, you pull the rope, you get it started, you hit the throttle, and it just goes whoom and dies. You start it back up, you hit it again, does the same thing. You start it again, does the same thing. What's happened by storing that product with gasoline in the tank, with just regular pump gasoline in the tank and in the carburetor, is that you've caused things to collect inside that carburetor. The fuel has evaporated away and left an oil residue in all the jets. So what I want to show you here, hopefully you can see this, is I've got some diaphragms inside that carburetor. And I'll show you what these do in just a second. As you can see, this diaphragm right here is plenty pliable. It's got a lot of movement to it. This one is stiff. It almost looks like a potato chip. What that has to do, when that air starts flowing through the carburetor bore, is that airflow has to pull that diaphragm down. So I'm going to show you what happens when you spray or force air through a tunnel. This is some of the old science things that we learned back in school. So we're going to force a little air through, and you can see that it pulls that paper down. When air goes through, it speeds up and creates a low pressure. It does the same thing with these diaphragms. When air goes through the bore of that carburetor, it has to pull it down, open the inlet needle, and let more fuel in. When these diaphragms get stiff, then that engine can't operate. We definitely do not want an engine that runs lean, because if you see this piston, I think I held this up earlier, if you look at this piston right here, the hottest part of that cylinder on a typical air-cooled two-cycle engine, regardless of brand, is always going to be hotter on the clutch exhaust corner. And that's going to be the first place that gets those seizures. So you pull your muffler off and you can see the scoring there. So we don't want those engines to run lean. That's why it's so important to winterize and use Motomix or just store them dry. I have 2 brass jets in this carburetor, and they are tiny. They're very, very small orifices that allows the fuel to go through into the engine. There's a little jet right here that takes literally nothing to plug that jet. That's why it's so important to make sure that our fuel is clean, our machines are properly stored, and that we have a good fuel filter in that machine at all times. Periodically, you're going to need to replace the spark plug in your machines. Be sure that you buy these from a dealer that knows what spark plug goes in. Don't just go buy one off the shelf. One of these spark plugs is a resistor and has the proper heat range. The other one in my right hand is not. That can cause some real damage to your machine if you don't have the correct spark plug in. The resistor plug is very important, especially in our fuel-injected machines and our M-tronic machines, to make sure that we get the spark at the right time and the right amount of spark. This plug right here is a non-resistor plug. I had a guy drive all the way down from St. Louis with a fuel-injected machine that he couldn't get running right, and all that was wrong is it had the wrong type spark plug in it. We put the correct one in, ran perfect. Let's talk a little bit about bar oil. Bar oil has what's called a tackifier. The Stihl oil is made out of a base crude oil. It's not re-refined, and then it has a tackifier that's added to it. And that tackifier makes it cling Even though that chain's spinning, in some cases up to 60 miles per hour, that oil makes it cling to the chain and reduce wear. Again, like we talked about on the engines, we want two pieces of metal to never touch. And that's where the thicker oil and the tackifier comes in, by holding that between the guide bar and the chain. The stihl chain is designed with what we call oil-o-matic grooves that hold the oil and route it up into the wear areas or the rivets of the chain. So by using a E-matic guide bar and an oil-o-matic chain, you'll get more life and less stretch from your chain. So one of the other questions I get often is, how do I know if my chainsaw is putting out adequate oil? So it's a very simple test. Start the chainsaw, run it up about half throttle, hold the guide bar down about an inch or so away from a piece of wood, and see that it puts out a good oil streak. One of the other questions I get a lot is, can I use used motor oil in my oil pump for my chain? Yes, you can, but it's one of those old adages, pay me now or pay me later. Used motor oil, the lubricant is designed for an engine under pressurized oil. It does not have any tackifier in it, so it's not going to cling to the bar and chain the way that true bar and chain oil would. So you're going to get some premature wear on your bars and chains by using used motor oil.
Stan, I learned a lot. Thanks for taking time to share that with us. It's frustrating to get out there, you're going to do some habitat improvement work, and your equipment doesn't work right. And those tips will keep my saws running smooth. I hope y'all take these tips and it helps you be a better habitat manager, get more work done, because then you can enjoy the fruit of your labor for years to come. But you know, that's a relatively short time frame compared to eternity, and what we need to do to prepare for eternity, just like taking care of our saws, is seek the Creator's will for our life and apply it daily. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.